Hello, everybody. In case you're new here, my name is Michael Wagner. I teach at the Westphal College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And on this channel, I talk about digital media, game design, and spatial audio. Now, the video today is going to be another question and answer video. There were a number of questions that came in that I thought were really interesting, so I decided to answer them in form of a video. These questions will relate to Dolby Atmos and the use of DaVinci Resolve Fairlight for Dolby Atmos music production. And we will also briefly touch about what you have to do if you want to actually set up a full Dolby Atmos speaker system for your production environment. So how can you actually do that in a budget-friendly way? But before we get to that, I first would like to make a very brief announcement. YouTube has become really, really difficult to follow in the sense that many discussions are starting to get really, really technical and very involved. There were some discussion threads that had like 20, 30 going back and forth. So I decided to open up my Discord server. So if you want to get in touch with me, if you have any questions that go a little bit beyond what the YouTube discussion forums can handle, I invite you to join my Discord server. There's nothing you have to pay. I'm not monetizing my channel at all. There's an invite link in the description below. So if you're interested in getting in touch with me that way or kind of getting in any form of discussion with me, please follow that invite link and join my Discord server. Now, since I'm already doing, this public service announcement, please also consider subscribing to my channel if you like the stuff that I'm doing. And don't forget to like that video, because of YouTube algorithms, really. So with that being said, let's get to the first question. The first question comes from user IAMMPS, and it's actually not so much a question as it is a comment. I'm not going to read the entire comment. What the user is hinting on and what he or she is actually frustrated about is the fact that this low to no cost entry that we have taken into the world of Dolby Atmos music production has exposed some limitations that we now find ways to work around in a creative way and quite frankly in an imperfect way. And last week, what we did is we added a binaural rendering mode to the Dolby Atmos setup that we had in a DaVinci Resolve Fairlight project. And the only way we could really do that is by bypassing the Dolby Atmos renderer completely and using the panning algorithms from DaVinci Resolve Fairlight. The problem only is if we do that, we're actually bypassing one of the things that Dolby Atmos is really good at, and that is really the panning. So if we do that, obviously, the situation is less than perfect. Now, in order to get a better sense of what exactly I'm talking about, let me go back to the project that we had last time, and that was essentially a very simple DaVinci Resolve Fairlight project. We had a Dolby Atmos mastering bus, and if you want to know on how exactly we set that up, I would refer you to the video. I'm going to post a link in the description below, and that worked fine. So we could use that to export Dolby Atmos master file, and there was no problem with doing that. However, it only allowed us to monitor everything in stereo and not in a binaural render mode. And that is really a disadvantage because in a regular production environment, you would like to be able to at least kind of monitor everything binaurally so that you have an understanding of how people will actually hear that out there in the real world. So we got around that by creating an additional 7.1.4 bus, which we call the binaural monitor bus. And we put a binaural rendering plugin on that bus. And then we fed the beds as well as the object into that bus, in addition to also feeding them into the Dolby Atmos renderer. So all the objects and all the beds were routed into the Dolby Atmos renderer on one side and also into this binaural monitoring bus on the other side. And that then allowed us to switch between the binaural monitoring bus and the Dolby Atmos renderer, and therefore we could switch between the output of the Dolby Atmos renderer, which was stereo, and the output of that monitoring bus, which was in binaural. In a binaural rendering mode, let's put it that way. The problem obviously with that is that we are now bypassing the panning algorithm in the Dolby Atmos renderer, and we are instead relying on the panning algorithm that are included in DaVinci Resolve Fairlight. And there's some expectation that the Dolby Atmos panning algorithms are probably better suited for that purpose. So that is a degradation of quality. Now, as long as we are aware that this is happening, I don't think it's a big of a problem. And the reason why I think it's not that big of a problem is because we're actually having a much bigger problem. And that much bigger problem is that we're also not really taking advantage of the binaural render mode of the Dolby Atmos rendering plugin, right? If we really want to know exactly what the users are hearing out there once my production is done, there's really no other way than to monitor that in the way Dolby is meant to be heard, and that essentially means that I have to use the external Dolby Atmos renderer in the binaural rendering mode in order to actually hear that. The fact that we are using the binaural as a studio as a workaround also degrades that quality, and it actually degrades it, at least in my opinion, not because the binaural as a studio is bad in any way, but just because the Dolby Atmos rendering plugin is so good. It also degrades it in a way that is actually more visible or more hearable than the difference in the panning algorithm. So if you're out there and essentially kind of trying to get into that field, and I had a couple of people reaching out to me and saying, I have problems monitoring that, you need to be aware that anything that we do here is a workaround to the fact that we have limited possibilities with these internal rendering plugins. And you will always need to find a way to get to the point where you understand how your mix translates to the actual Dolby Atmos rendering output in case it is used in a Dolby Atmos system. So the best way to really do that is to have some sort of Dolby Atmos monitoring system somewhere in your house. It might be just a regular, kind of home theater system or whatever, so that you can actually hear how that sounds there. But the solutions that we have here will never give us the exact sonic qualities of what the Dolby Atmos output will be. Now, I'm currently trying to figure out a way to kind of approach that problem in a low-cost way, and unfortunately, there is no other way than to actually integrate the external Dolby Atmos renderer in your production workflow, and that makes it really difficult to do with a Windows system. So over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to publish 1 or 2 videos where I'm going to show you how you can actually integrate the external renderer in your setup. We will not be able to do the same thing that people are doing in a full-blown Dolby Atmos production studio, but we will at least be able to monitor everything on our workstation. And so if you're interested in these things, watch out for some of the future videos, and I'm going to kind of show you how to do that in a financially feasible way, not to say cheap. So it's not really cheap, but it's at least not that expensive, or at least not as expensive as it would be if you want to set up a full Dolby Atmos production environment. The second question comes from Torme van Kool, and he or she is asking, there's also something not in line with the Atmos for music specs, and that is referring to the output that we created in DaVinci Resolve Fairlight using the internal renderer, the internal Dolby Atmos renderer, that created a Dolby Atmos master file in WAV format. And the user complains that sort of the actual Dolby Atmos music specifications ask for a file that has 3 files included. It's actually a file bundle. There's one file that is a multi-channel audio file, and then there are 2 files that represent the metadata. And what the user most likely referring to is the Atmos file bundle. That is a different type of Dolby Atmos master file format. And unfortunately, kind of DaVinci Resolve Fairlight does not produce that type of file. However, there's a very easy workaround. Fortunately, Dolby provides us with a tool that can convert any Dolby Atmos master file into any other Dolby Atmos master file format. So if you have a WAV file in Dolby Atmos, you can convert it into an Atmos bundle. All you really need to do is download the conversion tool. It's free. I'm going to post a link in the description below, and start up that conversion tool. It works on Windows as well as on Macs. However, on Windows, I found it has a couple of really nasty interface bugs. So if you're working with it on Windows, don't be alarmed that things don't look the way they're supposed to look, but it works perfectly fine. So essentially, you start a new conversion, load up your WAV file, create an Atmos file bundle or whatever you need, and you are ready to go. So this allows you to create convert any Dolby Atmos master file format into any other Dolby Atmos master file format, with the emphasis on master file format. So it does not allow you to render that out in a different file format, for example, in an MP4. So for that, you actually need the Dolby Atmos renderer. But if it's just converting from one master file format into another master file format, the Dolby Atmos conversion tool does its job, and it does its job quite well. The third question comes from user Asmit Hansta. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. If not, I apologize. There's actually two questions. The first question talks about Dolby Atmos in Ableton. So could you use Ableton or could you kind of pan 7.2.6 or 7.1.4 tracks in Ableton on Windows with headphones? And the answer to that is a yes and no. In principle, Ableton is not set up to do anything other than stereo. However, Ableton has this extension or this capabilities to be extended through Max for Live, and that would technically allow you to do pretty much anything, really. So you could kind of create a solution that can actually do that. And I haven't checked that. There might even be people out there that have already created kind of panning devices based on Max for Live that can do that. However, if you are really interested in doing this kind of work with 7.2.6 tracks or 7.1.4 tracks, I would recommend going with a DAW that can actually support that natively. In Ableton, it will always be a workaround. Now, the second question has to do with the number of objects that you can have. And there was a little bit of a discussion that followed this question, and it became clear that the user wanted to know if it is possible to have more than 128 objects, or more than 118 objects, actually, because the first 10 channels are the bad channels. And the answer to that is a strict no, and the reason a hard no. And the reason for that is because that's part of the Dolby specifications. The Dolby specification clearly states that there are 128 tracks in total, and the first 10 are bad, and the remaining 118 can be used for objects or bad, or there are also other uses that they're used, for example, for a time track. The reason they settled on 128, and that's just a guess from my perspective, is that probably the sweet spot that would work best for the architecture. Now, in order to understand that there's actually a hard upper limit is, you need to understand on how a professional Dolby Atmos production environment actually is set up. Now, usually the way this is done is that you have a workstation that runs the digital audio workstation, and then you have a second workstation that is responsible for the rendering of the Dolby Atmos content. And the communication between the two is handled through sending audio channels from one to the other. And the way our Dolby Atmos works is that one audio channel is sent for each kind of object in the Dolby Atmos environment. So if you have 128 objects or 128 tracks, you actually have 128 outputs on the digital audio workstation and 128 inputs on the Dolby Atmos rendering station. And that essentially means that you need to have interface solutions for sending out 128 tracks and also kind of taking in 128 tracks. And as you might expect, that is already quite involved and quite complex and quite expensive to do. So my feeling is, and once again, this is just a wild guess, that when they designed these specifications, they tried to figure out what is the sweet spot between the number of channels that is big enough so that I still can do anything that I want, but at the same time it's not so big that it becomes completely impractical for a professional studio to actually use, because they once again need to have an audio channel for each individual object to send from the digital audio workstation to the rendering workstation. And that is actually that, if you have 1,000 objects, which would be nice to have, but it essentially means that it becomes completely impractical to be implemented in that particular way in a production environment that utilizes the setup Dolby Atmos was meant to be set up. The final question for today comes from Nicholas 2, and Nicholas asks a very interesting question that I was personally interested in for quite some time, and I actually got quite a few similar questions in the past, and that has to do with, if you ever want to leave the realm of monitoring these things with headphones, and if you want to actually set up a production environment that has an actual surround system, 7.1.4 Dolby Atmos surround system, how can you do that in a budget-friendly or cost-efficient way? And the answer to that is there are possibilities. However, it's not going to be cheap. So you will need to be able to spend a little bit of money in order to be able to achieve that. But it is not out of reach for most of us. Let's put it that way. Now, when we're talking about the costs that come with setting up a system like that, there are really kind of two things that you need to consider. First of all, the fact that you have 12 channels means that you need 12 speakers. And they need to be reasonably good speakers. Kind of today you can get kind of fairly good monitors for about $100 to $150 per piece. So, and then maybe like 300 to 400 for the subwoofer. So you have like 9 speakers, 9 times $100 plus the subwoofer. So that is the cost for the speaker system as such. And then you also need to buy an audio interface that can address all 12 speakers. And that's where it gets a little bit complicated, because most audio interfaces are not really capable to kind of handling that many outputs, especially not analog outputs. Now, the one audio interface that I usually recommend when it comes to having an audio interface with as many analog outputs as possible is the Behringer Euphoria UMC 1820, and that interface has a total of 10 analog outputs, and that's actually something that brings you quite far. I personally can recommend this audio interface. We used it in our lab at the university for setting up an inexpensive ambisonics monitoring system, and it actually works quite well for that particular purpose. And it's not really expensive. So if you might even find it on sale for less than $300 at some point. Usually it's somewhere between 300 and 400, but it is certainly in a range that you can afford. However, as you might have noticed, we only have 10 outputs and we have 12 speakers that we want to address. So how do we go about that? How we solve that? Now, there are a couple of different ways on how you can approach that. And the first way is to maybe think about, is there a possibility for me to reduce the number of channels without reducing the immersive quality of the audio? And obviously what you don't want to do is you don't want to remove any of the overhead speakers, because they're really critical to kind of giving you that immersion. But what you could do is you could reduce the number of surround speakers. You might not need 7 of them. You might get away with 5. And fortunately, both DaVinci Resolve Fairlight as well as Nuendo, the renderer that come with those, have the option to go from a 7.1.4 to a 5.1.4 output. So let me just show that. I've opened up Nuendo here, and I didn't really do anything with Nuendo here. Let me just open up the renderer. Essentially, you see that the downmix, there's a downmix option for 5.1.4. So you don't need to play it at 7.1.4. You can actually go to 5.1.4. And 5.1.4 means that you can address all the speakers with a 10 output audio interface. So you could technically do that with the Behringer interface. That would also reduce the costs for the speakers a little bit, because you now only need to buy 9 you need to be 9 speakers and one surround sound speaker. So that's also going to reduce the cost a bit. So everything would come down to about $1,500, something like that. But that would certainly work, but it would reduce the quality of your audio a little bit, because you're no longer getting the full surround experience. You actually have reduced that to 5 speakers. So how do you go about if you really want to address or you really want to have access to all 12 speakers? Now, there are really 2 ways how you can do that. And the first way is that you can simply daisy chain your audio interfaces. So you, instead of having one audio interface, you can have 2 interfaces and daisy chain them together. Now, on a Mac, that is very straightforward to do. On a Mac, you would simply create an aggregate device and put all the audio interfaces into the aggregate device, and that works perfectly fine. This is actually one of the things that Macs are really good at, and that's probably also one of the reasons why when it gets to multi-channel audio, people still rely on Macs, because that's something they can really do. They can really combine audio channels and have many audio channels. And On the Windows system, you can do the same thing. It's a little bit more unstable. Or should I say it's less stable than on a Mac, but you can do that through ASIO for All. So with ASIO for All, you can also combine audio interfaces to create a combined audio interface. Once again, when I did that, usually at some point the computer crashed, so it is not as stable. At least I didn't find it as stable as it could be, but it does work. So you can definitely do that. Now, if you're interested in finding out more about how to actually combine audio interfaces into one audio interface using either ASIO for All or on a Mac using aggregate devices, I advise you to just kind of search on YouTube. There are many videos of people who show you on how exactly to do that. There are also a couple of things that you need to consider in terms of making sure that the clock is synchronized between these audio interfaces. But there are many tutorials out there that kind of show you how to do that, and that can be done fairly easy. So that's one solution. The second solution is to go directly to an audio interface that has more than 10 outputs. And a good solution, for example, would be the Scarlett 1820. And this interface has the option of 8 analog outputs and 8 digital outputs, which come through an ADAT output. Now, the disadvantage here is because the digital outputs need to be converted back to analog. That essentially means that you need to add a digital to analog converter that can convert ADAT back into analog outputs in order to kind of get the full range of 12 analog audio channels. And for the purists of you, you might also notice that if I do that and I kind of take some outputs from the analog outputs of the interface and some outputs from the digital output of the interface and convert them with a digital to analog audio converter, the conversion digital to audio is actually going to be different for those digital channels. And even though most of us are not going to hear any difference, some of you might actually kind of be object to that idea to have that. So if that's a concern to you, you would have to upgrade to a audio interface that had more than 8 digital outputs so that you can essentially take all 12 channels that go to the 12 speakers from the digital outputs of your audio interface. But if you do that, you obviously need to kind of upgrade your game a bit and kind of go for a slightly more expensive audio interface. But it's technically not that difficult to do, and it's possible, and it is in the range of something that, you know, kind of most of us would be able to afford. So you don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars. You can probably get away with $2,000, $2,500 to set something up like that. And if that's something you want to do, then I would say go for it. I think it's really interesting to kind of go that route. We will see more and more Dolby Atmos content in the future, and it might be an investment to get into that game. And if you ever get to the point that things get really to a professional level, then you can always kind of go the full Monty and go with the full $20,000 Dolby Atmos production setup. But at least there's a possibility to have a kind of budget-friendly entry, even if you want to do a speaker setup. Now, this is really everything I wanted to say today. If you like the content that I'm doing, please consider subscribing. Also, if you like that video, please press the like button. If you want to get in touch with me, either use the YouTube comments or better than that, subscribe to the Discord channel. The link to my Discord server is in the description below. And other than that, see you at the next video.